The bourbon never made it to his desk. It shattered like truth, fast, loud, irreversible. Crimson silk bunched at her waist. His shirt hung open like an unfinished apology. My wedding ring caught the office light as it slid from my finger, hitting the marble floor with a sound louder than betrayal. They didn't notice me at first. That's the thing about secrets. They always feel safe until they're not. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply watched the illusion of my life die quietly under the fluorescent glare of an office I helped him build. And when he finally turned, when our eyes met over the wreckage of 20 years, I whispered what no wife should ever have to say on her anniversary. Happy anniversary, Caleb. I knew Leo understood the moment he stopped chewing his first spoonful of soup. Not because it tasted bad, but because of the note I quietly tucked under his bowl. In that moment, the man who once promised to protect me for life looked like he was about to swallow the spoon whole. My heart still stops when I remember that Thursday afternoon, the metallic taste of betrayal flooding my mouth. The way time seemed to fracture into a before and after. It was our 20th anniversary, and I had planned everything meticulously. The rare artisanal bourbon Caleb had once mentioned in passing the titanium cufflinks. He'd lingered over in the jeweler's window, but declared too extravagant. 20 years deserved something memorable. The key card to Pinnacle Media Group felt unusually heavy in my hand. As I stood in the elevator, Caleb had given it to me years ago, when he became editorial director, a gesture of inclusion that I'd rarely used. His workspace was his sanctuary, or so I believed, with the blind faith of a woman who had never imagined herself a victim. The executive floor was eerily silent at 6:30 p.m. The emptiness amplified every sound. My heartbeat, my breathing, the sharp click of my heels against marble that seemed to announce my arrival to no one. As I approached Caleb's corner office, I rehearsed my surprise in my mind, imagining the delight spreading across his face. The reservations at D'Amico's, where he had once knelt before me with a ring, were set for 8 p.m. I didn't knock. A surprise announced isn't a surprise at all. The door opened silently on its well-oiled hinges, a metaphor for our marriage maintained at great expense to appear flawless. The scene before me burned into my retinas with such clarity that I still see it when I close my eyes at night. Caleb's broad back, his suit jacket, discarded carelessly on the floor, his dress shirt open, but still clinging to his shoulders, and beneath him sprawled across his mahogany desk. The desk I had helped him select when he took the editorial lead was Riley Stone, his 29-year-old executive assistant, her crimson skirt hiked obscenely around her waist, her stilettos digging into my husband's back, urging him deeper. The sounds they made, God, the sounds. Animal Primal Betrayal had its own soundtrack, and it plays on repeat in the darkest corners of my mind. The gift bag slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, the bottle of 15-year-aged bourbon, Caleb's favorite, shattered on impact, the amber liquid seeping across the hardwood like blood from a wound, time suspended. They froze mid-motion, caught in their sin, like insects in amber. Julia, Caleb's voice, cracked, a hairline fracture that would soon split our entire world. He stumbled backward frantically, fumbling with his pants, his face flushed with exertion and now draining to ash. Riley scrambled to cover herself, but her eyes, those eyes, they held no shame, no remorse. Instead, I caught something worse. Pity. That pity crystallized something inside me, a kernel of ice forming where my heart had been spreading outward until I felt nothing but a glacial calm. Happy anniversary, I whispered, my voice, a ghost of itself, eerily detached from the hurricane raging inside me. The weight of those two words crushed the air between us. What was once sacred, now desecrated beyond repair. I turned and walked away behind me. Caleb called my name with increasing desperation. Each repetition, more frantic than the last. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had all the time in the world, because in that moment, I realized that time was now mine again, no longer ours. The night janitor looked up as I passed, his eyes widening at whatever he saw in my face. The elevator doors closed on, Caleb's voice muffling his pleas as I descended in the safety of my car. I sat motionless behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, the interior of the car closing in like a tomb. Every ounce of composure I'd faked inside that building now collapsed under the raw, unfiltered agony crashing through me. The trembling began, not gentle shivers, but violent, uncontrollable quakes. That made it impossible to insert the key. 20 years, 2 children we'd raised together, a life constructed with meticulous care, each memory, a brick in a foundation I'd believed unshakable. And yet, like hairline fractures creeping silently through stone, the truth had been there, unseen, growing, waiting for the right moment to break it all apart. Now, with horrific clarity, I saw the cracks that had been there all along, the late nights, the missed family dinners, the work emergencies that always seemed to happen when we had plans. How long had it been happening? Was she the first? The questions crashed against me like waves in a storm, threatening to drag me under. I called my sister Meredith, my voice so altered by shock that she asked twice. If it was really me, she offered to drive the 3 hours to reach me immediately. I refused. Some primal instinct told me I needed to face Caleb alone. But deep down, it wasn't just strength that made me refuse her. It was shame, a bitter, hollow shame that I had been blind, worse, complicit in the slow erosion of my own marriage. I had been the one stitching the seams of something already torn, pretending each thread was enough to hold us together. I kept asking myself, how could I not have seen it? How could I let this happen under my own roof when he returned? He didn't come home. That night at 2:17 a.m., the blue glow of my phone illuminated the darkness staying at the Langford Hotel. We need to talk tomorrow. I'm so sorry, sorry. 1 syllable, 5 letters, utterly inadequate for the devastation he'd caused. I sat motionless in our custom-designed kitchen with its hand-selected marble island that Caleb had insisted was an investment in our future. I stared at the family photos lining the walls, Lacey's, graduation, Evan's, baseball championship, our vow renewal on our 15th anniversary, the smiling faces of our children, now away at college, unaware that their family foundation was crumbling. I traced the timeline of our marriage through these captured moments and wondered which smiles had been genuine and which had been performance when dawn broke. Painting our pristine white walls with golden light, I hadn't slept, but the fog of shock had lifted, revealing a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. This betrayal wasn't just about sex with his assistant sprawled across his desk. This was about 20 years of me, diminishing myself, to fit into the negative spaces of his life. This was about the woman who had managed his household, raised his children, hosted his business dinners, and smiled beside him at every gala, only to be discarded when something newer, younger, and less complicated caught his eye. The pain had settled into my bones, slow and heavy like winter cold, that no blanket could warm. I wanted to scream, to shatter every wine glass and picture frame in the house, but instead I sat frozen in the quiet grief of a woman who realized her entire marriage had been slowly bleeding out while she'd been too busy keeping it alive. The woman he'd betrayed wasn't going to dissolve into tears and recriminations. The woman he'd betrayed was going to ensure that every time he heard the name Julia Hartman, he would remember the magnitude of his mistake. The next day, Caleb returned home. He looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. His typically impeccable appearance was in shambles, stubble darkening his jaw, eyes bloodshot. The same shirt from yesterday now wrinkled beyond salvation. He found me sitting at our dining table, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold hours ago, my stillness unnerving even to myself. Julia, please, he began, his voice catching. Let me explain how long. The question hung between us, simple, yet devastating. He hesitated, a momentary pause that confirmed what I already suspected. This was no one-time indiscretion. 8 months. He finally admitted, each word seeming to physically pain him, but it didn't mean anything. 8 months, I echoed the words like shards of glass in my throat. 8 months of coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, making love to me. While you were with her, my mind calculated rapidly. 8 months meant he'd been with her during Evan's surgery, during my mother's funeral, during Christmas morning, when he'd given me the diamond earrings I was now wearing. Every memory of the past year suddenly required re-examination, contaminated by this new knowledge. It was a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake that will never happen again. Caleb dropped to his knees beside my chair, his hands clutching mine with desperate intensity. I love you, Julia, You and the kids, you're everything to me. My whole life tears actual tears. Stray down his face in 20 years of marriage. I'd seen Caleb cry exactly twice when our children were born. The sight of his anguish should have moved me. But instead, I watched him as if, through a pane of frosted glass detached numb, unsure whether the ache in my chest was heartbreak or relief that the truth had finally surfaced. There was something grotesque in his collapse. This man who once commanded boardrooms now groveling at my feet, and I could feel nothing for it but cold observation. My hands remained limp in his grip, my mind battling the tidal wave of grief with the last fragments of my dignity. Instead, I found myself clinically observing the mechanics of his grief, wondering whether it stemmed from genuine remorse or simply fear of consequences. I let him talk. I let him spin his narrative of momentary weakness, of stress and temptation too great to resist. I let him promise therapy, transparency, renewed commitment. I nodded at appropriate intervals, asked the expected questions about details I already suspected, and gave him the impression of a wounded wife processing betrayal, a role I played with such precision it frightened even me. I had become both the actress and the audience, detached yet alert, calculating while appearing shattered. When he had exhausted his prepared statements of contrition, when he thought he'd weathered the worst of the storm, I asked one final question. My voice was honey, smooth, betraying nothing of the trap about to spring. Does Malcolm know? Malcolm Worthington, Caleb's business partner, mentor, and the man who had given him his start when no one else would. The man whose name appeared alongside Caleb's on the agency's masthead. Caleb's face drained of color so rapidly I thought he might faint. Why would Malcolm need to know about our personal issues? I smiled, a small, cold thing that didn't reach my eyes. I'm simply wondering if your business partner knows that you've been sleeping with his daughter for the past 8 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of our home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, seemed to recede. In the face of this bombshell, what Caleb whispered, the single word, barely audible: Riley Stone, born Riley Worthington. She changed her name professionally to avoid accusations of nepotism when she applied to work at Pinnacle. But surely you knew that, Caleb? Surely you vetted your executive assistant before hiring her, before bending her over your desk? He hadn't known the horror blooming across his features, confirmed it. This was information he was processing in real time, and the implications were catastrophic. His lips parted, but no sound came out, a man so often in control, now entirely unmed. I watched as disbelief twisted into dread and then into something colder. Panic. The realization struck him like a falling scaffold, splintering the fragile lie he'd built around his secret. How? How did you? I met her 3 years ago at the company Christmas party. I said each word, measured and precise. Malcolm introduced her as his daughter from his first marriage. She didn't stay long, just a brief appearance. You were deep in conversation with the Sanderson account representatives. You never even noticed her, but I did. I remember thinking how striking the resemblance was between them. The same sharp jawline, the same unusual amber eyes. Caleb collapsed into the chair opposite me, his legs no longer able to support him. Malcolm Worthington wasn't merely his business partner. He was his mentor, his advocate, the majority stakeholder in their firm, and a man with an old-fashioned sense of honor that extended particularly to his family. I gave everything to this marriage. I continued, my voice unwavering despite the molten rage coursing through me. I abandoned my legal career. When I became pregnant with Lacey, I moved away from everyone. I love to support your ambitions. I've endured lonely holidays, raised our children virtually alone during your busiest years, and stood beside you through every career milestone. And this is how you repay loyalty. Julia, please, we can fix this. I was going to tell you that night that I'd been accepted to finish my law degree. I said, the revelation landing like another blow. Remember that dream I set aside 18 years ago? I was finally going to reclaim it. That was my anniversary surprise. Instead, I found you with your pants around your ankles and your partner's daughter moaning your name that night. Caleb slept in the guest room through the wall. I heard him making frantic calls to Riley, undoubtedly trying to confirm what I'd revealed. His panic was palpable, filling our home like poisonous gas. 3 days later, Caleb returned home. With the news I'd been expecting, Malcolm had called an emergency board meeting. There were rumors of a forced buyout of Caleb being removed from the company. He had helped build his name literally on the cover. "They can't do this to me." He raged, pacing our bedroom like a caged animal. While I sat calmly on the edge of our bed, I built that agency from nothing, my reputation. My connections, they'd be nothing without me. "Like you built this marriage?" I asked softly. He stopped, then turning to face me, and I saw something new in his eyes. Not just fear of losing his creative empire, but genuine terror at the possibility of losing me, of facing the wreckage of his life alone. "I need you, Julia," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I cannot get through this without you." His voice cracked in a way that might once have stirred compassion, but now sounded like the whimper of a man finally understanding the weight of his own destruction. I gave him nothing, no comfort, no reassurance, no absolution. I simply watched as the realization dawned that everything he had built, everything he had valued, was balanced on a knife's edge, and I knew something he didn't. It was already falling. What Caleb could never have imagined, what his ego would never have permitted him to consider, was that my discovery of his affair wasn't the beginning of my story. It was merely the climax of a narrative that had been unfolding for months. 6 months earlier, I had borrowed Caleb's iPad to order a gift for Evan. A notification appeared, an email from someone identified only as E. The message wasn't explicitly incriminating, but the tone was intimate in a way that set off alarm bells. "Last night was worth the risk," could have had 100 innocent explanations, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Nonetheless, I didn't confront him, some dormant instinct. Perhaps the lawyer I'd once trained to be whispered to gather evidence before making accusations. It wasn't rage that consumed me then, it was calculation. A slow-burning, measured awareness that if I wanted justice, I couldn't afford a misstep. I hired Sienna Lau, a private investigator who had left the FBI after 15 years to start her own security firm. I paid her from funds my grandmother had left me in a separate account, money Caleb had no knowledge of. Our initial meeting was in a coffee shop 3 towns over, where there was zero chance of running into anyone. We knew most clients, Sienna had told me, stirring her espresso with methodical precision, want instant confirmation of their suspicions. They want dramatic evidence they can throw in their spouse's face during a confrontation. That approach rarely serves their long-term interests. "I'm not interested in drama," I'd replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "If my husband is betraying me, I want comprehensive intelligence, not just who she is, but what vulnerabilities they've created together. I don't want a confrontation, I want leverage." Sienna had smiled, then a small approving quirk of her lips. That suggested I was a rarity among her clientele. Most people allow emotion to override strategy. That's refreshing for the next several months. Sienna compiled information with frightening efficiency. Photos and videos documenting the affair in excruciating detail, email exchanges, hotel receipts, time-stamped, building access logs showing late-night entries to the office. She built a comprehensive case that would have been devastating on its own. But Sienna gave me something far more valuable than proof of infidelity during her surveillance. She noticed financial irregularities that piqued her professional interest. She brought in Marcus Dean, a forensic accountant whose services she occasionally employed together. They uncovered Caleb's secondary betrayal. He had been systematically siphoning company funds, small amounts carefully, concealed but consistent, into an offshore account in the Caymans. Nothing that would trigger immediate alarms, but substantial when viewed in aggregate: a nest egg separate from our marital assets, an escape hatch. What Caleb never understood was that being the housewife had made me an expert in our finances. I paid our bills, managed our investments, tracked our expenditures. I understood money flows and tax implications. I spoke the language of finance with more fluency than he realized. While Caleb believed I was taking a creative workshop on Tuesday evenings, I was actually meeting with Sienna and Marcus in a private room at the local library, mapping the elaborate architecture of my husband's deceptions. But even as I worked the plan with mechanical efficiency, there were nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I had failed too, had I missed signs. Had I grown too quiet, too safe, too invisible in the very marriage I was now dissecting? There were moments. I hated that I still loved the man I was preparing to destroy. "He's been careful," Marcus had observed during one session, his finger tracing the convoluted path of funds across multiple accounts and entities, but not careful enough. He never anticipated this level of scrutiny. He never anticipated me. I corrected quietly after discovering them in his office. I accelerated my timeline, the night Caleb spent at the Langford Hotel. I wasn't simply sitting shell-shocked in our kitchen. I was executing a plan months in the making calls to our family attorney, to Sienna, to Marcus, and most crucially, to Malcolm Worthington. My relationship with Malcolm had always been cordial but distant. The respectful interaction of two people connected through a third party rather than by genuine friendship. He was a serious man. A decade older than Caleb, divorced twice with an old-fashioned sense of honor that Caleb, often ridiculed in private as outdated, Malcolm had always treated me with a deference that stood out in a business culture where partners' wives were often regarded as decorative accessories. When I called him at 11:30 p.m., he answered on the second ring, despite the hour, Julia. His voice carried concern rather than annoyance. "At the late call, is everything all right?" "No, Malcolm, it isn't," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I need to meet with you tomorrow alone." There was a brief pause. "My office, 9 a.m., use the private elevator." The meeting lasted 3 hours. I brought the financial evidence. Marcus had compiled spreadsheets, bank records, transfer authorizations bearing Caleb's signature. I didn't mention Riley, not yet. That revelation would come through another channel. At the precise moment it would inflict maximum damage. Malcolm listened in absolute silence, his expression growing increasingly grave as I laid out the evidence of Caleb's embezzlement. When I finished, he sat motionless for a long moment, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Why bring this to me, rather than to the authorities?" he finally asked, his tone impossible to read. "Because I believe in allowing people choices," I replied carefully. "You were Caleb's mentor. You trusted him with your company, your reputation. I thought you deserved the opportunity to handle this internally. If that's your preference." What I didn't articulate was that this approach gave me greater control over the outcome. A public scandal would hurt everyone in its blast radius, including my children, and by extension me. This way I could calibrate Caleb's downfall with surgical precision. I wasn't interested in revenge that would blow up everything indiscriminately. I wanted impact, precise, measured, irreversible. This was strategy, not emotion. I would not burn everything down. I would simply close the doors behind him one by one until there was nowhere left to run. Malcolm nodded slowly, something reluctant respect flickering in his eyes. "I appreciate that consideration, Julia, more than you know." As I was gathering my materials to leave, I paused at the door and turned back, my expression carefully composed. "Malcolm, does your daughter still work in marketing at Thompson Media?" His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Riley?" "Yes, she's a creative director there now." "Why do you ask?" I smiled sadly. "No particular reason, just thinking about professional trajectories. Lately my daughter is trying to determine her own path." The seed was planted. Now I needed only to wait for Malcolm to discover exactly who he was, and I had arranged for that revelation with meticulous timing. While Caleb was desperately attempting to salvage his professional reputation, I was systematically dismantling our shared life. I met with our family lawyer, revised our estate plan, and documented every instance of Caleb's financial impropriety. I transferred our children's college funds into accounts only I could access. I changed the passwords on our joint accounts and took inventory of every valuable item in our home, and I completed my application to law school. Caleb was so consumed with trying to save his position at Pinnacle that he barely registered my quiet efficiency. Each movement I made, each form signed, password changed, asset secured, was a step away from the wreckage, a slow but deliberate march toward reclaiming my autonomy. When he commented on my apparent calm, I attributed it to shock, to emotional processing. He was so pathetically grateful that I wasn't threatening immediate divorce that he failed to notice. I was executing a far more comprehensive separation. "We'll get through this," he said. He kept insisting, his desperation palpable. Once this crisis passes, we'll rebuild everything together. I would nod and offer a small smile, all while thinking, you have no idea what's coming for you. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 8 a.m. The weekend before Caleb oscillated between frantic optimism and crushing despair. A pendulum of emotions that would have exhausted my sympathy had any remained. I performed my role with Oscar-worthy precision. The supportive wife concerned, but steadfast, I helped him prepare his defense presentation. I pressed his best suit with careful attention to detail. I made his favorite breakfast, eggs Benedict with smoked salmon, the morning of the meeting. There was something surreal about performing these rituals of intimacy, all while harboring the knowledge that I was setting the stage for his unraveling. Each gesture of care was both a mask and a message. I know, and I am in control. Whatever happens today, he told me, as he adjusted his tie in our bedroom, mirror his eyes seeking mine in the reflection. Knowing you're standing with me means everything. Julia, I don't deserve your loyalty, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life earning it back. I stepped forward, straightening his collar and brushing an imaginary piece of lint from his shoulder up close. I could see the fine lines of strain around his eyes, the gray at his temples that seemed to have multiplied overnight. For a brief moment, I remembered the young man I'd fallen in love with, ambitious, brilliant, seemingly invincible. That man was gone, now replaced by this desperate stranger wearing my husband's face. Good luck today, I said, kissing his cheek and catching the scent of his cologne, the one I'd given him last Christmas. What Caleb didn't know, couldn't have known, was that 3 days earlier, a manila envelope had been hand-delivered to Malcolm Worthington's home address. Inside was a USB drive containing select images and videos of Caleb and Riley together, along with hotel receipts, text, message transcripts, and a note that simply read, "Ask your daughter about her relationship with Caleb Hartman." The package wasn't traceable to me. It had been arranged through Sienna, who had employed methods ensuring plausible deniability. The timing was deliberate, Friday evening, giving Malcolm the entire weekend to process the information to confirm it, to allow his anger to crystallize into something cold and implacable. Caleb left for the board meeting expecting a difficult day, but clinging to the belief that his value to the company would ultimately outweigh his transgressions. He had no concept that he was walking into an execution chamber at precisely 2:13 p.m. My phone rang. It was Marcus, who had maintained contact with a member of Pinnacle's legal team. "It's done," he said without preamble. They confronted him with everything. The embezzlement, the affair with Malcolm's daughter. Malcolm apparently remained silent. Through most of the meeting then, simply said, "My daughter confirms everything Caleb attempted to argue. It was a personal matter, but they had the financial documentation. He's been removed, effective, immediately, and they're pursuing criminal charges for the financial misconduct." I thanked Marcus and ended the call. Then I contacted the locksmith I had on standby and arranged for all the locks on our home to be changed within the hour. Next, I called our children. Lacey and Evan were both in college. Lacey completing her senior year at Stanford, Evan in his sophomore year at Columbia. I had already prepared them weeks earlier, with hints that their father and I were experiencing significant marital difficulties. Now, I provided a carefully curated version of events. Their father had made serious professional and personal mistakes. Our marriage was over, and yes, another woman was involved. They responded with the mixture of anger, hurt, and confusion I had anticipated, but they were adults now, not children, and I respected them enough to share the truth. If not, every sordid detail that would only cause additional pain. "Is Dad going to jail?" Evan asked, his voice suddenly small, despite being 6'3" and the starting center for his university's basketball team. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That depends on many factors beyond my control, but I promise both of you will be protected. No matter what happens." By the time Caleb's car pulled into the driveway at 4:42 p.m., the locks had been changed. My lawyer was on standby, and Caleb's personal belongings had been neatly packed into boxes stacked in the garage. He looked utterly destroyed. When I opened the door, a husk of the confident man who had left that morning, his tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned, his complexion ashen. The confident stride that had always carried him through life was replaced by the shuffling gait of the defeated. They knew everything he whispered about. The money about Riley Malcolm knew every detail like he'd been watching us. How did they know it all? I stepped aside to allow him entry into what had been our shared home for the past decade. He stumbled in, collapsing onto the sofa in the living room, like his legs could no longer support. There was no fire left in him. Just a hollow shell caving under the weight of consequences he never thought would arrive. The man who once negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat now looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. Only the stakes were infinitely higher. Malcolm looked at me like I was something scraped off his shoe. He continued staring vacantly at nothing and Riley. They called her into the meeting. She denied everything said. I coerced her that she feared rejecting me would jeopardize her position. She sacrificed me without a moment's hesitation. His voice cracked, equal parts disbelief and heartbreak, as if the betrayal from her somehow stunned him more than the collapse of his career. I murmured noncommittally, seating myself across from him. That must have been devastating. His eyes flicked to mine, searching, pleading for a crack in the armor, for some flicker of the wife who once stood proudly beside him. But there was none. I had buried that woman the day I saw him on top of Riley. He looked up, then really seeing me for the first time since he'd entered something in my demeanor. Perhaps its very calmness triggered a dawning suspicion, Julia. He said slowly, his eyes narrowing. What's happening here? I smiled, a small, satisfied expression that contained 20 years of accumulated grievances. Caleb, did you genuinely believe I wouldn't discover the truth? Not just about Riley, but all of it. The offshore account, the money you've been systematically embezzling for years. Every word I spoke was laced with the kind of cold precision that only comes from months of suppressed rage. The blood drained from his face so completely, I momentarily wondered if he might faint. You. How could you possibly? I've known for months. I said evenly about everything. I was simply waiting for the optimal moment. Understanding crashed over him like a physical blow, followed immediately by fury that transformed his features into something ugly and unfamiliar. You orchestrated this. You deliberately set me up. I didn't force you to steal from your company, Caleb. I didn't compel you to sleep with your partner's daughter on your office desk. I merely ensured you faced appropriate consequences for choices you made entirely on your own. He lunged forward with unexpected speed, seizing my wrists with bruising force, his face contorted with rage. You calculating? Do you have any conception of what you've done? They're pressing criminal charges. I could go to federal prison. I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked pointedly at where his hands were gripping my arms, already leaving marks that would blossom into bruises. I would reconsider your current action very carefully. Caleb, there's a security camera recording in this room now, and my attorney has instructions to file for an emergency restraining order. If I give the signal, how do you imagine assault charges would complement your existing legal predicament? He released me as, if burned, stumbling backward, his breathing ragged. This is my house, he snarled, desperation lending his voice a feral quality. You can't just actually, I can. I interrupted, rising smoothly from my seat, as of 10:17. This morning, this house is solely in my name. You signed the property transfer documents last week. If you recall, you were so preoccupied with the impending board meeting that you didn't bother reading what you were signing when I said it was for refinancing. His expression collapsed into disbelief, mingled with horror. That's not legally possible. That's fraud. No, it isn't. Everything was executed with perfect legality. Consult your attorney. Oh, that's right. I smiled, calm and deliberate. He resigned from representing you this afternoon, citing irreconcilable conflict of interest. He's my attorney. Now, I walked deliberately to the front door and opened it. The message was unmistakable. Your personal items are packed in the garage. You have 30 minutes to take what you can and leave. The remainder will be donated to charity. This isn't over. He threatened, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. I'll fight you for everything you've taken. I laughed then, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed to unnerve him more than anger would have. With what resources, Caleb? Your assets are frozen. Your professional reputation is in tatters. Your business partner wants to see you incarcerated, but please, by all means, fight me. I've been preparing for this battle for months. What exactly have you been preparing for another 20 years of deceiving me? While you gradually drained our accounts, his mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes darted around the room, perhaps searching for a shred of the control. He once wielded over me over everything, but there was nothing left. I had burned it all down with precision, with patience, and with every ounce of strength. I once buried beneath his shadow. In that moment I realized that, even as I stood tall, a quiet tremble passed through me, not from fear of him, but from the sudden release of years of silence, of nights spent questioning my worth, of shrinking to fit within the confines of a man's world that had never truly seen me. He departed an hour later after cycling through intimidation, threats, and finally, pathetic appeals to our shared history and the family we had built together. He took his clothing, his collection of luxury watches, and his golf clubs. I permitted him to take the Porsche, though technically it now belonged to me. I had no use for a midlife crisis vehicle with impractical seating. As I watched his taillights disappear down our street, my street, now I experienced something I hadn't felt in years, the exhilarating lightness of freedom. A liberation that wasn't loud or wild, but silent and seismic. A sense of finally standing on solid ground, not the fragile surface of a shared life that had always belonged more to him than to us. That was 2 years ago. Caleb pleaded guilty to reduced charges of financial misconduct to avoid a trial that would have further exposed the extent of his personal and professional betrayals. He served 6 months in a minimum security federal facility, followed by 2 years of probation and community service. The plea agreement required him to pay substantial restitution to Pinnacle Creative Group. I filed for divorce while he was incarcerated. With the mountain of evidence I had meticulously compiled, the proceedings were remarkably straightforward. I received the house, the majority of our assets, and a settlement that ensured financial independence for the remainder of my life. Malcolm Worthington contacted me after the dust had settled. He expressed gratitude for bringing Caleb's misconduct to light, but we never explicitly discussed how I had uncovered the connection between Caleb and his daughter. There was a quiet understanding between us, an unspoken recognition of lines crossed, boundaries broken, and dignity reclaimed. He offered me a position on Pinnacle's board of directors, an offer I politely declined. I had other ambitions to pursue. Riley left Thompson Media within weeks of the scandal breaking. According to industry gossip, she relocated to Chicago to reset her career trajectory. Malcolm and I maintain a cordial professional relationship, but we never discuss her. Some wounds are understood without requiring acknowledgement. Lacey and Evan struggled with the aftermath of their father's disgrace. They experienced the complex emotions one would expect: anger at his betrayal, embarrassment at the public nature of his downfall, and the complicated love that persists. Even when a parent has failed catastrophically after his release, they cautiously began rebuilding their relationship with him. Caleb now occupies a modest apartment and works as a consultant for a small investment firm willing to overlook his criminal record. In exchange for his undeniable expertise, I make no attempt to influence their relationship with their father. Some lessons must be learned firsthand. As for me, I completed law school last month, graduating with highest honors from an accelerated program at 48. I was the oldest student in my cohort, but also the most determined. I've accepted a position with a prestigious family law practice specializing in high-net-worth divorces. It turns out my personal experience provides valuable insight that clients in similar situations deeply appreciate. My children occasionally ask if I regret the comprehensive manner in which I ended my marriage. If I feel remorse for the public humiliation, the criminal charges, the scorched earth approach I employed, I tell them the truth. I regret that their father made choices that fractured our family. I regret that he so profoundly underestimated me that he believed I would simply accept his betrayal without consequence. But I do not regret refusing to be discarded after giving him the best years of my life. I do not regret reclaiming my power. Last month I encountered Caleb at Lacey's graduation ceremony. Time has not been kind to him. He's aged dramatically in 2 years. His once dark hair, now completely gray, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, the physical manifestation of consequences. We maintained civility for our daughter's sake. He congratulated me on completing law school. You always were more formidable than I gave you credit for, he said, a complex mixture of bitterness and reluctant respect coloring his tone. I smiled politely. Yes, Caleb. I was people often ask if I'm dating again, if I'm open to building a new relationship. I tell them, I'm focused on my career renaissance, on rediscovering myself. The complete truth is more nuanced. I'm not opposed to finding love again someday, but I will never again be the woman who diminishes herself to accommodate a man's ego. I will never again maintain silence in the face of disrespect. I will never again accept less than I deserve the night after Caleb left our home. For the final time, I stood before the mirror, in what was now solely my bedroom. I studied my reflection, the woman staring back at me with clear eyes and straight shoulders. I made a solemn vow to her. Never again will you be invisible. Never again will your worth be determined by someone else. Never again will you settle for the scraps of another person's attention. Each morning since then, I renew that promise, and each day I honor it, dear friend. If you've made it this far, I want you to pause for a moment and breathe. Let the silence settle. Let the truth echo. You are stronger than you think. This story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about rebirth. We live in a world that tells us to forgive, to endure, to preserve harmony, even at the cost of our own dignity. But there comes a time when choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. When walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Like the Stoics taught us, you have power over your mind. Not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I didn't control Caleb's betrayal, but I controlled how I responded, and in that response I reclaimed myself. To every woman and man sitting in silence, nursing invisible wounds, asking, is this all I deserve? This story is your mirror. You are not here to be diminished. You are here to be seen, heard, and honored. Yes, endings hurt, but some endings are entrances in disguise, doorways to lives we never dared to imagine, because we were too busy holding on to something that didn't honor us. My journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, human, and at times terrifying. But each day I chose clarity over confusion, action over stagnation, and truth over illusion. And now I live not as someone's wife, not as someone's shadow, but as someone whole. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you are, then maybe something in Julia's story has touched your heart. Maybe it mirrored a part of your own. Maybe it whispered to you that strength and clarity are not traits reserved for the fearless, but born in the quiet moments after everything falls apart. What this journey teaches us isn't just about betrayal. It's about rebirth, about the quiet, often lonely decision to reclaim your name, your worth, and your future. Julia didn't just walk away from a broken marriage. She walked toward the woman she had always been, strong, intelligent, and unstoppable, once she remembered her own power. This isn't just her story. This is your story too. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever made yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's narrative. And now, just like Julia, you get to choose. You get to say, never again. Never again will I allow someone else's choices to define my worth. Never again will I ask for permission to be whole. As Viktor Frankl once said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves, and that's the power you hold right now. So if you're at your own crossroad, I see you. I honor your pain and your courage. Let this be your reminder. You are not broken. You are breaking through. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep building this community where healing is real, truth is honored, and no one walks through the fire alone. Your story matters. Your healing is possible. And your future? It's still yours to write.